The Woke Podcast. On today's episode, we have Christopher Everett, who's the film producer of Wilmington on Fire. You don't want to miss today's episode. We go real in depth on the massacre that took place in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898. The Wilmington Massacre was a bloody attack on the African American community by a heavily armed white mob with the support of North Carolina's Democratic Party on November 10, 1898, in the port city of Wilmington, North Carolina. It is considered one of the only successful examples of a coup d'etat in the United States that left countless numbers of African American citizens dead and exiled from the city. This event was the springboard for the White Supremacy movement and Jim Crow segregation throughout the state of North Carolina and the American South. Wilmington on Fire gives you a complete historical and present-day look at the events, showing how the violent overthrow of an existing government not only cemented white supremacy in the city of Wilmington and the state of North Carolina, but also throughout the United States. Trust me, you do not want to miss today's episode. Please be sure to share it. Please be sure to follow Wilmington on Fire on all social media platforms and check out WilmingtonOnFire.com. You need to have this film. You need to share this within your community. If you have children or loved ones, you need to share it with them as well. This is a very important part of our history that does not get talked about. Even if you are not someone from Wilmington, North Carolina, this is still our history. So tune in, sit back, and enjoy the pod. Peace. So Chris, so tell me a little bit about, who you are, where you come from, and how did you get into making this actual documentary?
Okay. Well, I'm from a small town in North Carolina called Laurinburg. I guess many of you listeners, they probably don't even know where the hell that's at. but it's about 2 hours from Charlotte, 2 hours from Wilmington, and about 40, 50 minutes from Fort Bragg, which is in Fayetteville, North Carolina. But, man, I just, I've always been interested in making movies ever since I was a kid. And then after I graduated high school, I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, and went to school at King's College and studied graphic arts, graphic design. And then after that, I was 100 pounds lighter back then. And then I got into, acting and modeling. And so I was doing that for a few years. Then I moved down to to ATL, Atlanta, I say about 2007. And then once I moved down there, I didn't really get to do the acting stuff that I thought I was going to do. And then after that, I started kind of wanting to make my own projects. And, I started shadowing a few people, working on some, free student film projects here and there, little indie film projects here and there. I just kind of fell in love with it, man, of just having the power and control of making your own the type of films you want to make. And I did a small little fundraising documentary for a historical black boarding and day school in my hometown of Laurinburg called the Laurinburg Institute. And I did that filmed that from 2008 to 2010. And that was kind of my first taste of some type of experience trying to do my own film. And then after that, I decided to take it up to another level and wanted to do another documentary. And then I kind of was researching on the internet and some other things like that, and I ran across the whole Wilmington 1898 massacre story. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was fascinating because, I grew up in North Carolina and grew up 2 hours from Wilmington. I never heard anything about it. And
wow,
automatically, once I saw it and read about it, it made me think of John Singleton's Rosewood, and then also hearing about the Tulsa Massacre and stuff like that. And then I just started doing a little research and started reading some of the commission reports that are online that was commissioned by the state of North Carolina, and also started reading a few books on the topic as well. And I saw that no one actually did a full-length film on it, documentary or narrative. So I said, you know what, I'm gonna take this as a personal challenge, and I'm going to do it. I'm going to take the little bit of money I got and put it together, and we'll see if we can make something happen. And that's how, I got this whole thing started.
Wow. Yeah, and I viewed the film, high quality production, sound, colors, visuals, Everything is top notch.
Yeah.
It didn't seem like I was watching the film from somebody who's only done a few small projects. It seems like you've been in the game for a decade or more with this film. I mean, it's a knockout film. I'm not even joking. Plus, it also has a really dope soundtrack to it too. So I mean, you crafted this thing from beginning to end, and I know you've been working on this film for a couple of years. Because I know when we first got connected online is when I heard about it, and I think I heard you on a Blog Talk Radio show, Tracy Gilmore.
Tracy.
This was like damn near 2 years ago or so. So you've been putting this together for a minute. But man, I was blown away. I was blown away by this film. Tell us a little bit about what happened. Like, what happened in Wilmington?
Yeah. Well, Wilmington, man. Well, back then, before the massacre happened, Wilmington was North Carolina's largest city back then. It wasn't Charlotte. It wasn't Raleigh. Wilmington was the place to be, and it was a thriving port city as well. A lot of trade going on throughout the city. And also what made Wilmington interesting was it was a majority black city back then. And you had a lot of African Americans that were business owners, teachers. Also, you had a lot of black folks who were police officers and firemen as well. But another thing that made Wilmington very interesting again was that you had a lot of black people involved in the political arena. You had black aldermen and all those type of things throughout the city. And the whole Wilmington situation went down was because pretty much was about white supremacy, politics, and power. And you really have to go back to the Civil War. And when you go back to the Civil War and you look at the people who actually were involved in the 1898 massacre, a lot of them fought for the Confederacy. A lot of them were colonels, majors, had officer ranking throughout the Confederate Army military. So a lot of that kind of stemmed from that. And they always called Wilmington the capital of the white supremacy movement after the 1898 massacre. But the whole massacre and coup d'etat, it was pretty much an overthrow of the government. They took over the government. They killed a lot of the black citizens there, including some white citizens who were allies of the African Americans in the city. And they just totally destroyed the whole town, the political makeup and everything. And over a 2-year period, the city that was once majority black transferred to a majority white city. And it hasn't looked back since. And right then and there, they established Wilmington as the capital of the white supremacy movement. And you just saw a chain of events that happened throughout North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, throughout the rest of the South, of this whole Jim Crow movement. And then by the 1900s, man, Jim Crow was just set throughout the whole state of North Carolina and just pretty much set African Americans, years and years back, all the way up to, I guess, like the Civil Rights movement.
Yeah. And the film does a great job explaining that, documenting it. It ain't just, stories that were passed on from generation. Like there was actual documentation that laid a lot of this out, which is just incredible. One of the things that you mentioned was the movie Rosewood. And I remember watching that movie. I was probably like maybe 14 years old, picked it up on some cheap DVD from Target or Walmart. It was just laying around. And I remember watching that by myself and just being like, damn, like, what the hell is this? Like, this movie was crazy. And the movie touches on so many different things. And as I was watching Wilmington on Fire, it reminded me so much of that movie because it was just like, no, this actually happened, and it happened in more than one place. Oftentimes we hear about Tulsa, Oklahoma, but we had Wilmington, we had Rosewood, we had things that happened in New York. Like, this stuff that happened across the U.S. And a lot of these towns and stories don't have the lineage or the documentation to actually express what actually happened. So we have these types of towns and these situations that have happened all over. A lot of them are not documented. And,
exactly.
And what you said, go ahead.
I was just about to, I totally agree. And that's the thing, man, is that almost every year you find out new things about different massacres. I think one guy, he wrote a book, I think, about the Slocum Massacre. I think down in Texas, I think. And I think he released the book last year. It's like, and this other guy, he did a joint called Banished, a documentary a couple of years ago. And it was about about 3 massacres that happened, I think, in Georgia and I think Arkansas. So these days, there was thousands of these type of events. You know, they call them, I guess, ethnic cleansing. They were calling it that as well. They call it like, you know, race riots, massacres, ethnic cleansing. You know, those are the kind of the terminology they would use. But these type of things, man, they happen all over the U.S. Because, you know, they always try to make it seem like it's a down south thing.
Right.
But it's not. It happened everywhere, man, from top to bottom, east to west.
Yeah. Well, one of the big important pieces that was touched on pretty early in the film was this group that formed called the White Government Union. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the White Government Union?
Yeah. Well, the White Government Union pretty much was like a sort of like a secret political society in a way, like the Klan, but it was just more organized and structured. They had like a lot of your business people, your politicians, and things like that. You know, like the Klan were maybe, you know, your local sheriff and a few, you know, poor white folks. But the White Government Union, it was like the Klan, but that was more for your prestigious white folks. You know what I'm saying? Like people with stature, you know, big money, politicians, business people, and like that. And they really did a lot of the behind-the-scenes work of really organizing this whole thing, because this wasn't just a thing that was restricted to Wilmington. They did the massacre in Wilmington, but this was a statewide white supremacy movement, because when they did the Wilmington Massacre, that set the example throughout the whole state of North Carolina that this whole state of North Carolina is going to be under white supremacy. And you had White Government Union chapters all over the state. You know what I'm saying? So it was a well-organized white supremacy movement, which was an outgrowth of the White Government Union. And we have the documentation, as you saw in the film. You know, we got their actual constitution and bylaws. They got all that stuff of how they organized and the tips, you know, the strategies and tools that they were going to use to regain power, not only in Wilmington, but throughout the whole state of North Carolina, and bring it back to white supremacy.
Yeah. When I heard, I've never heard of the White Government Union, and I'm just like, just the title alone just speaks volume on the dedication to organizing power, determining and maintaining and enforcing white supremacy. White Government Union. It's like these were not just regular white folks. These were folks that had put themselves in positions to make critical decisions, and they did it. They did it in unison, and they did it against the established government in Wilmington, and they formed forces. And then the other part of it was the redcoats, that they got kind of like these lower white class militia guys who were known for inflicting their hatred and bias. They played them, got them to, you know, kind of join with them, played them to overthrow the whole Wilmington established government. I mean, I was just like, wow. And it didn't take long for them to make all this stuff happen either, which was just another mind.
Yeah, the thing is, see, they were planning and plotting this stuff for a few years. Because like I said, man, you had these type of massacres happen all over, especially like in places like South Carolina that are real close to North Carolina. But you had these type of things that were kind of building up. And I know one clip or one section that everyone really loves is the whole propaganda section by Dr. Wilmot Johnson.
Yep.
And he really breaks that down, man. See, they had a propaganda machine that was running nonstop for about a year and a half before they actually did the massacre. And it was pretty much, you know, putting out all these stories about you don't want to vote Negroes in office, or Negroes in Wilmington are getting all these public, you know, these political positions, which they weren't like that. They had a few positions, but not like to the extreme what they were saying. And they were saying that, you know, black people making all this money, they're going to end up taking over, they're going to come after your women and your daughters. They were saying all those things and saying that we got to put a stop to this by any means necessary. Even if we have to kill them, you must do it. You know, so a lot of the newspapers, the big newspapers back then, were White Government Union members. You know, they were white guys, and they were actually members of the White Government Union. So a lot of them ran the whole propaganda throughout the whole state. And it really set the climate and the tone for when they did the massacre, and pretty much blamed, you know, some of the African Americans for their own demise. And you even had a lot of black people back then that were actually blaming certain black people who wanted to stand up against all this racism and propaganda. They pretty much blamed them for it. And when you look at things like that, you see the same remnants of it today, when the victim always gets blamed, especially when it comes to our people. You see what I'm saying? Everyone else is blaming us for our situation, and plus we blame ourselves a lot of times as well. So it's like when you watch things like Wilmington on Fire and other films like it, you see that some has changed, but still a lot of things are still the same, especially how they use white supremacy and propaganda to really set forth their agenda.
Absolutely. One of the key figures in the film was Alex Manly. You had one of his descendants in the film as well. Could you talk a little bit about who Alex Manly was and why was he influential for this film?
Yeah, Alex Manly, man. Whenever you look up anything about 1898, whether you're Googling it or whatever, Alex Manly's name always pops up. Like any of the pictures, like the picture of, you might have seen a picture of the burnt down building with the white man standing in front of it. That was his newspaper building, and that's like one of the main pictures of the massacre. And Alex Manly, man, he was an African American man. He was mixed. He could easily pass for white, but he never really wanted to be classified as white. He lived and he lived as a black man, and he was proud of it. You know, he married a sister in Wilmington, and he started a newspaper called the Wilmington Daily Record. And it was pretty much the majority. It was a Republican type of newspaper. And back then, the Republican Party was more of your liberal type party. You know, and a lot of African Americans were a part of that movement back then for the Republican Party. So he really was in favor and lockstep with Republican Party, things and politics and thus forth. And he was really into also creating. He wanted to have a viable business, no doubt, but he also used his newspaper to push for, equality and a political agenda for African Americans and the Republican Party as well. But the white supremacists, they needed something to really latch on to before they could actually do the massacre, like what I was saying about the whole propaganda stuff. So Alex Manly, he does an article, but there's always been a rumor that he didn't actually write this article. But it came out of his paper, so he had to take the blame for it. But Alex Manly did a rebuttal article he pretty much rebutted an article from this lady called Rebecca Felton. She was like one of the first female U.S. senators. And she did this speech back in 1897. It was actually a year before Manly wrote the article. And she pretty much was saying that, white men need to raise up. It's the end of, slavery is over with, and white women need to be out here protected by their white men. And, white women out here working on the farms with these black men and being raped at will. And it's the duty of white men to stand up and protect, white womanhood. And if you got to, kill as many black people as you can, just do it. So that's like a paraphrase. But, so a year later, Alex Manly writes an article and pretty much criticizes Rebecca Felton's statement, saying that, you're totally wrong about your views about this whole situation, and that it's white men who are actually creeping, with black women. And he really exposed it. And he said also that a lot of white women are attracted to black men, especially mulatto black men as well. And then it's only when they get busted and caught they want to yell rape. You know what I'm saying? So when he wrote that type of article, they was like, okay, we're going to use this. And it worked because they plastered that article all over the state. Yep. And they had all these political cartoons that were, insinuating what Manly was talking about was real true. And, white women want black men and stuff like that. So they just put it all over the state, man. And he was the first target. When they actually did the massacre, they burnt down his newspaper building. Somebody tipped them off and told him that they were coming for him to kill him. So him and his brother jetted out of town. And they could easily get out of the area because they could pass for white guys. Everyone was looking for dark-skinned men, So they pretty much had to pretend white to even get out the state. You know what I'm saying? So they actually wanted to kill Manly. And the first act they did during the massacre was burn down his newspaper press. Then they just went all over the city killing black people at will.
Yeah. Wow. Manley, he's an interesting figure, and there was another person, I forgot to write his name. You had his descendant in the film as well.
Thomas Miller.
Miller, yeah. Yep, Thomas Miller. And what they did, and a lot of the black people of the town of Wilmington, they really highlighted black excellence.
Yeah.
I mean, these people were not far removed from slavery at all. Like, this is literally 25, years or so, or a little bit more than that, years or so after slavery, quote unquote, ended. And these people have put themselves in a position to really be the lifeblood, quote unquote, of that town. Like you said, Wilmington was the biggest city in North Carolina, and they were instrumental. One of the things that was also touched on in the film was this idea of fusion politics, and I thought this was very important and key because can you explain a little bit what fusion politics is?
Yeah, well, the whole fusion movement came about around that time, and it pretty much was you had black Republicans, and you had a few white liberal Republicans and white farmers, and they all decided that we all need to join forces. We pretty much have some of the same needs and interests. Let's join forces and get the Democrats out of office. So they created this thing called fusion, and fusion means kind of like they come together. You know what I'm saying? So that's when they kind of developed that type of term. They called it fusion politics. But they still ran under the Republican Party banner, but they just called it the whole fusion movement. And they were able to get a lot of their people in office from the state level all the way to the local level. You had a fusionist governor. You had a whole fusionist government throughout Wilmington, especially, and it was a mixed government. And that's what also made Wilmington unique. It really just wasn't like a one-sided government. It was a mixed government. It was what the so-called New South was supposed to be after the Civil War. That type of integration type of style, you know what I'm saying? Where you had black aldermen, you had like a fusionist white mayor, you had, black police department, black firemen, you had a good mixture, a nice little balance, per se. And the Democratic Party really couldn't stand that. And that's what the whole creation of the White Government Union came about. And it says that in their whole bylaws, Constitution bylaws, that they have to break up that fusion between the black Republicans and the white, populists, white farmers. And their whole movement was to bring those white people in the fusion movement back to the Democratic Party and back to white supremacy, so they can make white supremacy whole again. And that was one of the reasons why the White Government Union was created. It was to break up that whole fusion politics movement, because they knew that if all these people, the regular working class white folks and black people merged together like that and stood together like that, that they would have been unstoppable. You know what I'm saying? So that was one of the main reasons why they wanted to break up that whole thing. And they did. And, November 10th, 1898, they totally destroyed the whole fusion movement. After the massacre, there wasn't another fusion movement ever again in North Carolina.
Yeah, and that was very key, because the political system that we have now is I wouldn't say that it's 100% different. I would say that the labels have switched and things have gotten a little bit more confusing, especially for black folks. One of the things that I get a lot of flack for is saying that we're probably the most politically ignorant people on the planet, African Americans, and there's a lot that we don't understand. And something like fusion politics, a lot of people will say, hey, that's what we have now. We have black folks who, they're in office, and, we got people that we're working together with, not understanding that that's definitely not the system that we have now. And it also highlights the importance of all these people had a common interest, a common agenda. And the reason why they used the term fusion, it wasn't because they were together. It was because they had a permanent interest.
Exactly. Exactly. It was just your basic needs of life. Education. You know what I'm saying? Access to start a business. Access to get some land. You know what I'm saying? Just basic stuff. You still had, black people still had their own neighborhoods, and white people had their own neighborhood. And they had that. but, we're going to come together with political policies that we all have to benefit from, because we all have kids. We all want our kids to get a good education and be something out here in this society. So, they just had those common interests, political-wise, politically, per se. They really weren't together like that, but for political purposes, political agendas, they were kind of lockstep in on the same thing.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I think that's one of the undertones of the film and keys of the film to understand, especially for us, is that, when you have political interests, we can get a lot of things done. We can't just assume that people have our best interest at heart, because that's not necessarily true. And the whole reason, not the whole reason, but a huge part of the reason that the massacre happened is because white people were uncomfortable with the socialization with black folks. Once they start saying, okay, these people are getting a little bit too much, power together. They're living together, and now they're having sex with our women, and some of our men are having sex with their women. That's when things got uncomfortable, because they felt like once that socialization happens, we're going to lose control over what we have, and that's a threat to white supremacy.
Exactly. See, that's the thing, man, because white supremacy, man, they white supremacists, man, they look years down the road.
Yeah, absolutely.
They look what's going to happen 50 to 100 years down the road. And they saw that if we continue to let this happen, you're going to end up having pretty much a majority black city all the way. Your mayor, the whole government is going to probably end up being black 10 to 20 years down the road, everything. And then not only Wilmington, other places as well. They look at the big picture overall. A lot of times our people won't do that. We just look at right now, within a week's time or within a month's time, what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. White supremacy looks at the whole picture, and they look 50, 100, 200 years down the road and how it's going to affect them. So they said, we got to put a stop to this right now by any means. And, they did everything, man. They rigged the whole voting system, which nothing ever happened to them, because they pretty much intimidated people who would have told on them. They said they would have killed them or burnt their business down to intimidate them. And then when that didn't work, they just did the massacre.
Yeah. Wow. Another very interesting part of the film, I don't want to give too much of the film away, but was the part with the local pastor of the church and how he was ran out of town and threatened. I thought that was very key too.
Reverend Jalen Kirk. Yeah, he's one of the first. I think he had the first actual written hand account about what happened. After he was ran out of town, he actually wrote about it, and he's kind of like documented as having the first actual experienced account of the 1898 massacre, man. And he just talks about all of it, the days leading up to it, because a lot of people kind of felt something was going on. When you look at when you read his stuff and a lot of other people's writings, they kind of sensed something was about to happen. They just didn't know it was going to go that far. You know what I'm saying? They thought it might just be a little rally or something like that. Some people, might get a little rowdy, and that's it. They didn't think that it was going to be a straight-up massacre, and they were actually banishing people and trying to kill people and taking people's property and all that. But, Reverend Jalen Kirk, he talks about all that stuff, man, about, how you had even the white pastors participating in murdering people. And the lady that's in the film, Sonia Patrick, she talks about that, how you had the white pastors surrounding the church. They were involved in that whole white mob and trying to kill, that pastor of that church. But you have these white preachers preaching every Sunday about God and everything, right? But yet alone they're up here participating and actually praising the massacre, because you had a few white pastors after the massacre pretty much saying that this was God's will and this needed to happen to bring our city back, to restore our city. These are actual documented quotes from white pastors saying this stuff.
Yeah.
So, people like Reverend J. Allen Kirk, he survived the massacre and actually wrote about it. One of the first people to actually ever put something in writing about the whole experience.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That was a very key piece of the film as well. because, especially now, we I mean, it's always been like this for us because we've just been on a consistent threat and domination. But our go-to is always, well, we got to have faith. We got to forgive. Jesus and God, they're going to fix this for us. And we assume that the religions that we subscribe to, other folks or white supremacists subscribe to, and it's not the same thing. And
it's
we
totally
assume that our belief systems, our spirituality is going to be the only thing that's going to help us in our situation and help us overcome. But however, we have several examples that is not necessarily true.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And see, the thing is, man, it's like, and, a lot of times people say, well, why didn't black people fight back during the massacre? That's one question I always get. Well, you had quite a few black people who actually tried to fight back, but they were just they were outarmed. You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of times they didn't really sell a lot of that ammunition or guns to black people back then, and also people got to remember that it was the actual military also involved in killing these black people here.
Yeah.
Because the red shirts, they were actually former soldiers that just came back from the Spanish-American War. You had the Wilmington Light Infantry. They just came back from the Spanish-American War. And they were all part of that whole mob that were going around killing black people. And that's, you saw the instances of they were using the actual Gatling gun, which was like the precursor to the machine gun. So you got people riding around a wagon shooting a machine gun. You can't compete with that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? There's nothing you can do with your little gun you got.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? There's only so much you could do but just to run and get the hell out of town. You know what I'm saying? So they were really, you had black people who were courageous enough to try to fight back, but they were just outarmed, and just outnumbered.
Yeah, and that, I think that gun is important too, because is that in one of the museums?
No. This is the thing about this, right? They can now. They said they could never find the gun. There's rumors about where the hell it's at and everything, right?
Okay.
But hopefully in part 2 I can find the person who got it and we can see if they'll let me film it. But but yeah, they never really found the Gatling gun, so it's completely missing somewhere for many of years. But they actually have the rifles and everything like that they use.
Sure.
And I think that's in some museum or at the police station or something like that in their little museum vault. But yeah, the Gatling gun, no one really knows where that's at per se.
Yeah, but there is documentation of it though too. Yeah.
Yeah, you got the pictures. A lot of the pictures you see. I know one of the pictures you might see in the film where you got these guys standing on the wagon with the shotguns, and you see the Gatling gun in the back. Yep. Yeah, that's it right there.
I mean, and this is a prototype for a lot of the weaponry that we see now, like those big machine guns that are hosted on top of, military infantry vehicles. That's exactly what this was. So you think so for folks that aren't familiar with guns, think about next time you see a movie like one of those war movies where someone's in the Middle East and they're shooting off a car. That's what they had in Wilmington versus the black folks that had 6-round guns and things like that. Like there was no opportunity for them to compete with that.
Yeah. Yep. And like I said, man, all this stuff, this is military weaponry. You know what I'm saying? And these were military soldiers who were actually participating in the killing of black people. And see, that's what makes Wilmington's situation kind of unique than a lot of other ones, because in the other massacres and race riots that we've had in the country, those were just regular civilians killing black people. This was a mixture. This was a regular white folk civilian, and these were actually military soldiers. Pretty much was the United States military killing their own citizens.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And, power, wealth, and violence are kind of like the 3 running themes throughout the film. Because after the actual killings and things kind of ceased, we had a lot of displaced black folks, whether they were in hiding and running. A lot of folks just kind of hid out for a few days, and at night they would try to sneak back to their homes and gather as much as they can to get out of town. We had some upper-class black folks who were allowed to leave, I don't know how many of them it was, but they were actually allowed to get out of town, which is very interesting as well. And then you had just the slaughter. There's a lot of discrepancy on how many people died, which touched on in the film. Some documentation says 12 people. Other documentation says it could be anywhere between 51 to 100. Some people say it's even more than that. Can you talk a little bit about how that plays out and how that was spoke about in the film?
And see, this is the thing, man. I remember I was helping a research team do some stuff on the Tulsa Massacre, right? And I was working with this one historian, and he kind of broke down that whole thing of, in every massacre, they kind of don't give you the real figure. And this is how they only count, like, fatalities that they actually can record, or that the actual, I guess, people, you know, the medical doctors and everything actually get to. They don't count the people, the hundreds of people who died in the cemetery from the cold. You know what I'm saying? Because they ran and hid. They don't count those bodies. They don't count the people who actually were running. They might have got shot or gotten hit with a bullet or two getting out of the city, and then once they got 10 or 20 miles out of the city, they just died. They don't count that. You know what I'm saying? So that's why the numbers have really always been, you know, no one really knows. And then also you couldn't trust the newspapers back then, that they were reporting, a lot of the newspapers who were ran by the white supremacists were reporting that only 2 people were killed. And some of them actually reported that it was a black person that actually did the first shot, and that's why the massacre happened. So that's
Wow.
Yeah, exactly, man. This is crazy. And so that's why a lot of people over the years they knew about the massacre, but they didn't know what really happened. And then a lot of people were told never to talk about it. Even when we show the film, we showed the film earlier this year, and this older black man stood up, and he was from Wilmington, but he didn't live there anymore, but he was born and raised there. And he said, "Yo, this is the first time I actually had the courage to talk about what my parents passed down to me, and they always told me never to talk about this event, because if you do, you're gonna end up losing your job. You might end up losing your life." That's how serious it was, man, and that's how deeply affected black people in the area of the black people who knew about 1898 and how it affected a lot of those families. That's how deeply impacted they were, man. A lot of them were scared to death, and they told their kids never to talk about it, and they told their grandkids never to talk about it, and vice versa. You know what I'm saying? And
wow.
It went on and on and on like that, man. And that's why a lot of people never really knew what really happened until people started coming out, and they did the actual race riot report. They developed the commission to finally talk about what happened. You know what I'm saying? Then they started getting descendants of the actual, grandchildren and stuff like that of, those firsthand accounts that were passed down. They started looking up different records and writings and stuff, and really found out that this wasn't something that just happened all of a sudden. You know what I'm saying? That this was a well thought out, planned white supremacy movement and attack on the black community in Wilmington.
Wow. Yeah. As a therapist, that's what I do for a profession. I do mental health therapy. And, it's not uncommon for when I'm working with people, black folks, that we don't know our histories. There's this tool that we use called a genogram, where we pretty much track your lineage. We'll start with yourself. If the person has kids, we'll add them. We'll go parents, grandparents. We'll try to go as far up as we can. And many of the black folks I work with, they stop at their grandparents. Some of them can go up to the great-grandparents. And if I work with white people, or just any other ethnic group outside of black folks, they can go, great-great-great-grandparents.
Oh, yeah. They can go all the way back to whoever was the first to even come over here.
Yes, and it happens. That struck me right away, because when I learned how to do this technique in therapy, I did my own. And I'm like, damn, I can only go up so far back myself. And then on one side of my thing, I can just stop at my biological dad, because I don't know nothing about him. And that's one of the issues that we as black people have. We always talk about we don't know our history. We don't know our history. We need to go back to Egypt and understand everything that happened on the continent. But we can't forget that we don't even know our own personal histories very well.
Exactly.
So it's very hard for us to understand our collective histories when we can't even figure out our own family stuff. And I believe the reason is what happened with a lot of the folks from Wilmington is there's so much pain. We have this legacy of suffering under white domination that people just really want to forget a lot of this stuff and not bring it up because it's so damn painful.
Yeah. And I ran into that a lot, man, when I was first getting this thing together some years ago. I ran into that a lot. Either you run into it where I remember, man, this one person was telling me that they had found like an old box of old photos, right? It had like a whole bunch of pictures of like black firemen, black police officers, all like back in like 1880-something.
Wow.
Right? And the family just threw the box outside. It's like, like, why did they do that?
Wow.
You know, that's history right there, you throw it away. And I've noticed that with a lot of our people that a lot of the African Americans that I talked to, a lot of them didn't really have a lot of documentations and stuff. Like a lot of that stuff was in the museums or whatever like that we had to find. But I noticed with the white side of things, like these white families who were actually involved in the massacre, they actually preserved a lot of the records. Even though it's all about white supremacy, they still preserved it. Either they donated to the library or some type of museum or something to digitize it and preserve it for over 100 years. But I noticed with our people, we never really do that. And a lot of times, a lot of the history gets lost when you don't really do that. And that's one of the things I want to start, man, is like a good archive in Wilmington, a black archive, where people who have things and they're thinking about throwing them away, bring them to us so we can preserve it and research it and study it. You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of these records, man, that's how you can get some of these old properties back that were stolen. You know, these old records and deeds. And you want to keep these things because you can actually help black people who actually gotten property stolen. We're actually going to put that in the second one. I got a guy in the film. He actually got someone's property back like that because he found a discrepancy in like one of the old deeds, and he got this one brother his land back. I think the land was worth about close to $1 million.
Damn.
Got it back. Wow. And see, those are the things I want to do, man, when I start this archive thing, is to collect not only stuff like that, but just everything, all this history. But, yeah, you're right, though, man, about the whole personal, our own personal history. A lot of us don't, we don't know because we don't really pass those things down, or things have happened that we just like, oh, well, forget it, and that's it.
Right. So. Which is a traumatic response. So it's easier to just keep moving forward, duck your head down, not think about the past because it's too traumatic. Wow. Yeah, I was gonna save some of the film because I got so many questions. The film is so great. I didn't want to say everything, but the whole property thing was that was deep. But I'm gonna let folks actually see the film to check that out.
Cool.
I think that's a huge key to what happens and why we don't have a lot of legacy and we don't have a lot of wealth is because stuff was legit stolen, taken by force. I mean, and the film highlights that very great. So I'm gonna leave it right there. I ain't gonna talk too much about that because you have to see this film, man. Man, I was excited after watching. I mean, I was hurt because of what happened, but I was excited because this is the story that needs to be told. Before I connected with you online, I had no idea about Wilmington. Never heard of it. I've heard of Durham. I've heard of Charlotte. I've heard of all those because of the basketball programs and universities they have there. But other than that, never heard of Wilmington. Didn't know that it was the biggest, city in North Carolina. Didn't know none of that history. And I think that this film is really a highlight to what has happened throughout the United States because I truly believe that this has happened across the United States. Probably in every state there's been a community or a town like this. Here in the Twin Cities, we've had two towns like this that have had similar versions of this, but not quite massacres, but just the governmental, strategic moving and displacing people by force. That has happened across the globe.
And see, that's what people got to realize, man, is that, it's black history all around you because back then, as a black community, you had to start your own thing. You know what I'm saying? So every city had some type of black district or black business district because you couldn't go nowhere else. So black people had to create something of their own. And that's why you had a lot of black enclaves of little business districts or little towns and everything in every state, almost every city, because, we had no choice but to do for ourselves. You know what I'm saying? So it really didn't matter how small the place was or how big the place was. There was always some type of black district in a certain city throughout America.
Mm-hmm. Right, and it was ours. We owned it, and that's one of the key things is ownership. And even with yourself, with this film, this is ownership. This is you taking, the area of media, and you're owning it, which is important, and we have to support you. So we have to support you. I've heard you throughout the interview say there's going to be a second film, which is great.
Yeah.
We have to support that one too, because this is important. This is our history. Even if you're not from Wilmington, if you're not from North Carolina, hell, if you're not from the United States, this is what has happened to our people historically, and we have to know this, because this is why we're in a situation that we're in now, is because we've had all our excellence gutted from us, legit gutted, just taken.
And that's the thing, man, is that we definitely got to support, artists that are, courageous enough to tackle these topics and really put them out there and do it at a quality level. You know what I'm saying? And also, I've had certain backlash so far, of doing the film, but it's been coming from a different place that I didn't expect it from. It's been coming from, from my own community sometimes. Where, I've had people say, he's making all this money, which I'm not. You know what I'm saying? And the little money I make, it goes right back into the film and to do the second one. You know what I'm saying? But my thing, if I was, so what? It's a business.
Right.
But I'm not making like all this money, which they claim I am. But my thing is, we make it seem like it's something wrong if I was.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that's just like going to a business person with a store. That's like me going to Walmart and saying, man, you're making all this money. So.
Right.
I'm gonna talk bad about you and say don't go to this store no more because he's making all this money, he's robbing the community, all that stuff. But I've actually had people do that.
Wow.
And spread rumors about me, saying that I'm robbing the community. I don't see how I'm robbing the community when someone purchases a ticket.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
Just like you go to the movie theater to see Batman versus Superman.
Right.
You
right.
pay $10 to get a ticket. How's that robbing the community?
Right, and we'll have one black character in the film.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I don't get that, man. But, that's the thing, man, because, I don't know. It's weird, but you just got to ignore it. And you just got to just continue to do, what you do. And, and still try to do it for the people. And I've done several things on the low, man. I don't even talk about that. I've done a lot in the Wilmington community. I don't even live there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I still try to do things and try to support certain organizations and certain things, initiatives. But I do it on the low. You know what I'm saying? So, it is what it is, man. But I'm going to keep moving forward and do what I got to do. But everyone, I just want people to just support the film, man. WilmingtonOnFire.com. They can check that out, for whenever we're going to be screening and also when we're going to release the DVD and everything in November.
Yes. And you can give out the date. When's the actual date, release date?
November 10th. And the reason why I'm picking November 10th, because that's the actual day of the 1898 massacre. And November 10th is going to be the day that the DVD and the digital download and stuff like that will be available for purchase. So, it's going to be available on Amazon and also WilmingtonOnFire.com. But pre-sales are probably going to go on probably like beginning of October when we start pre-selling it. So,
all right, sounds good.
So everyone just log on to WilmingtonOnFire.com or just check us out on Facebook.com/WilmingtonOnFire, and you can keep up to date with everything.
Yeah. And I would encourage everybody, once again, even if you're not from Wilmington, it doesn't matter. You need to check out this film. This film just lays out what happened so beautifully, and it gives you your history. You may not have been from Wilmington. Your people may not have been from Wilmington, but this is your history because this has been done across the board, man. And it's a great film. Like I said at the beginning, just production-wise. I have a background doing some films, and what I've seen, color, sound, angles, all that. It's dope. It's dope from beginning to end. Great film, and I highly encourage people to check it out. I'm gonna buy a copy. If I can get enough interest from people up here, I would love to do a showing too.
Yeah, definitely, man. Yeah, let's stay in touch with it. We'll try to make something happen.
So before we get into talking about the film and to the research, why don't you give us a little bit more information about your background?
Okay. Well, my name is Christopher Everett. I'm 33 years old, born and raised in a small town in North Carolina called Laurinburg. I kind of started off years ago into the film industry. I was about 100 pounds lighter back then. But I started off doing acting and modeling back in when I was in college, actually. And while I was in college, I was studying graphic design at the same time. But that's where I kind of got my interest in being involved in film, but it was in front of the camera, being an actor and model, etc. So I did that for a little while. And then I moved to Atlanta in 2007 to try to take my acting and modeling game to the next level. So, everyone was starting to do a lot of things in Atlanta, and I was tired of North Carolina, so I said, you know what, I'll make the move to Atlanta and try to figure something out. But when I moved to Atlanta, I kind of just, didn't want to do acting anymore, kind of fell off, gained a whole bunch of weight, and then just decided not to do acting anymore. And I decided that I wanted to tell my own story, develop my own projects. So in 2008, I developed a small little fundraising documentary about a historical black boarding and day school in my hometown of Laurinburg, North Carolina, called the Laurinburg Institute. And the school was around for about, it was around since about 1904. And when I did the research and was talking to that guy who actually runs the school now, his grandparents started in 1904. And I was talking to him about, why did his grandparents come all the way from Alabama to start the school in Laurinburg. And he was saying that a lot of people didn't want to come to North Carolina back in those times in the early 1900s because just of the racism and things that were going on, the climate of everything in the state back then. So that made me want to do a little bit more research. Okay, what was going on in North Carolina back in 1904, 1903, 1902? And then I kept running into what happened in Wilmington, North Carolina with the Wilmington Massacre of 1898. Which led to the whole Jim Crow movement that happened throughout the state of North Carolina in 1900. So I was like, wow, I never heard of this before. It just reminded me of the movie Rosewood by John Singleton that I saw years ago, and also hearing about the Tulsa Massacre and things like that. So I saw that a few people wrote books on it, but I saw that there wasn't anyone who actually made a film or a documentary on it. So I took it as a personal challenge as well, that I wanted to do something on it, and thus I developed Wilmington on Fire.
Well, isn't that interesting? So you actually met somebody working on another project, and that's how you heard about Wilmington, North Carolina. Well, I have to admit this was new information for me because I never heard of the 1898 massacre. So give us more information and also tell us what kind of sources did you read to find out about what happened in Wilmington, North Carolina.
Okay. All right. Well, I didn't find out about it working on another project. It was actually my project about the Laurinburg Institute. It was I did like a little small 30-minute mini documentary film because I grew up around the school. I know the family and everything, so it was like a way for me to give back type of thing. I wanted to help the school out some way. I knew I had a background in film, so I said, you know what, I'll help you do this film project. On the school, and you can just use it for fundraising or awareness. So just doing the research for that project kind of led me into the 1898 story. But the sources and everything, I'll go back to the Wilmington Massacre. The Wilmington Massacre was pretty much an all-out attack on the African-American community in the city of Wilmington, North Carolina on November 10th, 1898. And it's also considered one of the only successful examples of an actual coup d'etat that has ever happened in America. And a coup d'etat is an actual overthrow of an existing government. And that's what actually happened in Wilmington on November 10th, 1898. Wilmington back then was a majority black city, and it was a very prosperous and thriving city back then. Back then, Wilmington was the main city in North Carolina. It wasn't Charlotte. It wasn't Raleigh. Everyone wanted to be in Wilmington. And also back then in Wilmington and also throughout the state of North Carolina, you had a thing going on called fusion politics, and that was a joining of a lot of black Republicans and white populists who kind of merged together and developed this quote-unquote phrase called fusion politics to pretty much put their people in office and try to make the laws more, favorable for everyone, to try to, I guess, the hopes of Reconstruction to really, really put out Reconstruction to what it really was supposed to be for, the country. But you had also a white supremacy movement that was going on in North Carolina and especially in Wilmington during the time as well, who didn't want to see that happen. So thus for the 1898 Wilmington Massacre happened, and then when the massacre actually happened, they removed all the black police officers, all the black aldermen. They got rid of all the white fusion office members and everything, and totally took over the government in the city of Wilmington. But it was also a statewide white supremacy movement. They rigged the elections across the state, and they pretty much were able to put all of their people in certain offices throughout the state of North Carolina. And then in 1900, they were able to win the governorship in North Carolina. And then after that, that's how they were able to basically set up Jim Crow throughout the whole state of North Carolina. And that was the main reason, that was the reason why you had Jim Crow that set in North Carolina, was because of the 1898 massacre. And that's how impactful and important, knowing about this event is. And a lot of people don't even know how we actually came into Jim Crow in North Carolina, but the 1898 massacre was the reason why.
Right. And so to tell this story, what did you do and what kind of research went into just developing the storyline so that people could understand the November 10, 1898 Wilmington Massacre?
Well, I started off researching. I actually found that the state of North Carolina actually had a 1898 race riot commission, and they actually developed an official state report on the Wilmington Massacre, and it's available online for whoever wants to see it. You can just type in Google and just put 1898 Wilmington Race Riot Commission report, and it'll come up. It's still online for free. So that was my first thing. I wanted to check out the report, see what all they had to work with. And just after reading the whole full 600-page report, for about a month or so, then I went to looking at some other sources, read a few books of people who have written about the topic over the years. And I also went to certain archives as well just to check out certain documents that were featured in the books and also featured in the actual state report. And then actually talked to the people who actually worked on the state report as well, some of the historians and researchers, and just got some insight from them on, where did they research, where did they get the information from, and all that. So it was pretty much like it took me about a year and a half to just collect a whole bunch of data to really just have to get a starting point of how I wanted to really attack the story and develop the story. And also the areas of research that I needed to go to, whether it was some archival, places who had a deep archive of a lot of, old photos and documents and deeds and stuff like that. Or I had to also just research and look up a lot of books that were written about, because you've had several books that have been written about the 1898 massacre since 1901. So I would try to search those out as well and read those to get a, sort of some type of perspective as well to go along in developing the story. So it pretty much was like a year and a half of just research and contacting people who actually contributed to certain, writings and also the official state report.
And you were doing this by yourself, or did you have a team of people working with you?
When you're an independent filmmaker, it means that you're broke. So I was by myself doing a lot of this stuff. But the experience I gained doing the small project for the Laurinburg Institute really helped me in doing research for this project. But also, I had while I had the research and kind of developed a structural outline how I wanted to attack it, I reached out to one guy who's in the film. His name's Larry Rennie Thomas, and he's featured throughout the film. He was one of the first people I reached out to kind of get the ball rolling and try to actually start filming some people on camera. And he has been a real big advocate about 1898 and the whole reparations movement behind 1898. And I reached out to him because I saw that he had an organization. And his organization, it actually seeks out direct descendants of the victims of the 1898 massacre. And he actually had, like, the grandson of Alexander Manley, who had the black-owned newspaper that was burned down back then during the massacre. He's worked with him for years, and a few other direct descendants of the victims of the 1898 massacre as well. So I really wanted, I just didn't want just the research to back it up. I also wanted firsthand accounts from, personal stories that were passed down, to children and grandchildren, for several generations. And I wanted those stories to be on camera as well. So I wanted to really do this thing of sharing those stories that were passed down to grandchildren and great-grandchildren to go along with the research and documentation as well. So I wanted people to have a personal experience, but also wanted it to be, factual and educational at the same time.
Right. This sounds like it sounds like you put a lot of yourself into this, with the passion, the drive. What was driving you to make this happen?
It's just, I just like to talk. I just like to tell these type of stories that aren't really, talked about in the mainstream. I wanted this to be my first film project, first major film project, and I just like to do things, a certain way. If I'm going to do something, I want to go all out and I want to go all in with it. I don't want to, half it. It's either all the way or nothing. So, I pretty much used all my money, all my savings and everything for the past 4 years to research this project, to develop it, to shoot it, to film it, and get everything going and everything. So, but it never really felt like work while I did this. It was a fun experience. Met a lot of great people, a lot of good researchers and historians and professors, and every time I would interview somebody, it was like I was getting a free education, every time. And I was like, wow, I wish all my teachers were this interesting. Even my camera guys, they would say the same thing. They always talk about Wilmington on Fire being one of their best film projects just because of all the knowledge and information and things like that we would just hear, sitting down for hours and hours talking with historians and direct descendants and activists and scholars and researchers. So it was just a great all-around experience, even though the work has been hard, but it hasn't really felt like a lot of work. Well, I know, we talked to one descendant, like I mentioned earlier, Alex Manley's descendant, Dr. Lewin Manley. He lives in Atlanta, and he's a retired dentist. But his grandfather was Alex Manley, and anytime anyone out there who's listening, anytime you Google or research on the 1898 massacre, Alex Manley's name always pops up. He was one of the key components of the 1898 massacre from the victim standpoint. He was an African-American man who had actually one of the only very few black-owned daily newspapers I know in North Carolina and possibly throughout the country back then. But, he was of mixed race as well, but he always recognized himself as a black man first and foremost. And he was a very outspoken person who really supported the Republican Party agenda back then. And back then, the Republican Party was more of your, liberal type of party back then than what it is now. So he was a very, very key figure in the city of Wilmington back then. But, his newspaper building was burnt to the ground back then, and he had to pretty much, him and his brothers and stuff like that, they had to pretty much leave the city forever and could never come back because of they were actually going to kill him. But just hearing some of the personal stories of, and this is one thing that not only from Dr. Manley, but from a couple of other descendants that we have in the film, a lot of them didn't really know about the history until they got older. Like I know Dr. Manley talked about how his parents rarely talked about it. And he said that his grandparents rarely talked about it to his parents when they were coming up. And I've noticed that in our community, we don't really talk about those type of tragic events. It's kind of like you talk about it, but you don't talk about it. And I think it was based off of fear in a way, because I know we're going to do a follow-up to Wilmington on Fire, and we've actually connected with a few of more of Alex Manley's descendants, and they talked about how when Manley moved away and, never came back to Wilmington, how he was pretty much paranoid the rest of his life. He had his kids. His kids would have a bodyguard that would go with them to school. He was living in Philadelphia, but he still feared for his life because of the 1898 massacre. So just hearing those type of things, just the terrorism that black people went through back then, even though they left the city and the state, there still was a fear in the back of their heads that at any time, someone could come for them because the federal government didn't do anything about the massacre. They just let it happen. So that's why that fear was always in the back of their mind, that, if we talk about it or say something about it, they might come up here and get us.
Right.
So just hearing those type of stories from Dr. Manley and other descendants. I know one lady, she read an actual letter from her great-grandfather after he was banished from Wilmington after the 1898 massacre. He was trying to come to his mom's funeral, and he wasn't even allowed to even come to his own mother's funeral because he was banished from the city. And if he was going to come back, they would possibly were going to kill him. So just having, descendants read personal letters, first-hand writings of their actual, grandfathers or great-grandfathers or grandmothers, was really touching. You know what I'm saying? Just to hear, the words from their own people.
Right. And, you mentioned Dr. Manley and how he spoke of his grandfather, Alex Manley, actually leaving. I mean, you spoke of the fire where his business was burned down. But what happened to some of the other people? Were there deaths that were associated? I mean, you could tell us how many people were actually killed during this massacre?
Oh yeah, they killed. It was a combination. They had a banishment campaign. If they didn't kill you, they pretty much exiled you from the city, and you could never come back. But they also killed a lot of black people at will. There's been countless amount of stories. No one doesn't even know the real figure, because back then, they burnt down the only black newspaper, which was Alex Manley. So we never could get that perspective because his building was burnt down. So the major newspapers back then that covered this, they all were part of the massacre, So they would make up crazy stories saying that it was only 2 people killed, or they said that African Americans started the massacre. And see, those were the stories that a lot of the newspapers pushed back then for years. You see, because they were a part of the whole massacre as well. They were part of the propaganda arm of the massacre. So if they put it out in a newspaper, that's all you can really go by. But when people started leaving and putting the word out about what really happened, back then that's when people started to talk. I'm like, okay, that didn't really happen, but we can't say anything. But there's been, speculation there was, 12 people killed, 8 people killed, also several hundred. Just from personal, letters and, so-called first-hand accounts, it looks like it several hundred to a few thousand. because when you go by the census, like I said, Wilmington was a slightly majority black city in 1898. After the massacre happens, 2 years later, the black population is like cut in half. So I know just more than just people just being exiled and leaving. They actually had to kill a nice amount of people as well for that population just split in half in like a year and a half time. You know what I'm saying? So,
right. And
so people
also,
have been, trying to still research like the actual number, which we probably will never know, because a lot of the newspapers back then, they were actually a part of the 1898 massacre and also a part of trying to cover it up and minimize it and to actually change the narrative of it as well to make it seem like this was something that had to be done because, African Americans were being corrupt and doing all this stuff, so the good white folks had to rise up and do this. But it was only 2 people killed, and that was the narrative that they always pushed out there for many years.
So that was the way that they justified what happened in that community.
Yes.
So when you spoke of the narrative, so you found old newspaper articles that supported what you just said?
Oh yeah. You could just in the articles, we have some of them in the film, and you can just check out some of the articles. Anybody who's a researcher out there, and they'll say, only 2 people were killed. Also, there was another article in another newspaper said that it was a black person who actually shot first, and that's what started the massacre. Which all that stuff wasn't true at all. That wasn't the reason why the 1898 massacre happened. But they always had to put out these type of smear campaigns. And when you look at what's going on today, that's why I tell people, just always look at history, because you'll be so surprised that what you're seeing today is really nothing new. The same stuff when you look in the old 1800, 1890, newspapers. It's like the same type of stuff that they talk, that they say about black people today in the media. Nothing
and things have
really changed.
Nothing has changed.
To, making black people seem a certain way to justify doing harm to them.
Right. Well, we're going to take a quick break and come right back, because this is an interesting discussion, and I know everyone wants to hear more. So just a quick break.
All right.
Well, welcome back to Research at the National Archives and Beyond Blog Talk Radio. This is your host, Bernice Alexander Bennett, and you can join me every Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, where I will have an expert to share resources, stories, and answer your burning genealogy and history questions. Remember, all of my guests share a deep passion and knowledge of genealogy and history. All of my shows are available as a podcast immediately after the broadcast, and they can be downloaded from Blog Talk Radio, iTunes, TuneIn.com, and Stitcher.com. Now, I have opened up the phone line if any of you would want to call in and ask a question of our special guest. By the way, just to reiterate, you have been listening to Christopher Everett, a film director who is talking about Wilmington on Fire. And Wilmington on Fire chronicles the bloody attack on the African American community, an unceded elected officials in the port city of Wilmington, North Carolina, November the 10th, 1898. So, Christopher, you mentioned that you spoke to some of the descendants and to certain experts and historians. Why don't you tell us, how did you go about selecting these individuals to be featured in your film?
Pretty much, I looked at the actual Race Riot Commission report that I was telling you about earlier that they had available online, and I looked at some of the contributors to it. And one was Larry Rennie Thomas, who I told you who I reached out to. He was one. I talked to him on the phone about it. He was all for it. He said, hey, whenever you're ready to film something, let's do it. I reached out to the lady who actually wrote the official state report, Lorraine Elfleet. She was down to do it. She said, hey, Chris, whenever you're available, just let me know, and we can film it, film my stuff. I reached out to Professor Sandy Darity of Duke University. He actually contributed to the state report as well. His whole focus was the economic impact analysis of the 1898 massacre, because I wanted to have that aspect to my film as well. And everybody who I reached out to either participated or contributed to the actual state report, or they've written books on it as well. And when I reached out to them, they all were for it. They all said, hey, yeah, let's do it. We need to have a film about this topic out here. And everyone was willing to do it and was willing to help me out with research or any research they had, notes and everything. So it wasn't difficult at all to get the people who I had in my film. That was the easy part, actually.
Okay, but what was the difficult part?
The difficult part was just the funding, and the funding of archival material. And a lot of people don't understand that when you do these type of historical projects, this stuff costs. A lot of the archival material that you see in films, you see on PBS and stuff like that, of old photos and old video and all that, a lot of that stuff costs. And the stuff I was paying for ranged from $5 a photo, which is nothing. But you had some stuff that went up to $100 a photo and $1,000 a photo. And that's when it kind of, can really cost you, when you have to have a lot of it, the film, to kind of carry your story. You just don't want to have just a whole bunch of talking heads. You got to have the archival material to kind of back up what they're saying as well. But also, some of the archival stuff just didn't exist. We know they killed people, but they just didn't take pictures of them actually doing it. So I had to actually pay an illustrator, who's a good friend of mine out of Charlotte. He's a great artist. His name's Wally McNair, in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I wanted to make illustrations that were kind of contemporary in a way, to kind of catch younger people's attention. So we did a mixed media type thing of combining, the archival material, the old archival material that we have in the film, and mix it with some updated contemporary illustrations of what happened in certain points of the massacre, like when black folks were getting killed by the Gatling gun, or they were getting lynched, or they were being sent out of the city. So if I couldn't find archival material, I had to pay an illustrator to kind of illustrate a certain scene that I wanted to, bring across in the film. But that was really the hard part, was getting the funds to really finish that part of it, which took a couple of years to do, but we finally did it.
Right. Now, in watching the film, I did listen to, I think it was Kent Chatfield, or it may have been Larry Rennie Thomas, where they spoke of a photo in the library with the participants of the massacre with the guns in their hands.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I think that was Kent. Kent Chatfield, he's an independent researcher, spent countless years on researching this topic, and he kind of starts off the film about when he first heard about 1898 and the Wilmington Light Infantry building, where a lot of this stuff went down back in 1898. back in, I say, the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s, it was the actual library in Wilmington, the public library there. And he talked about, and Ken was talking about how he would hear the stories about 1898 from the white community in the library and at his church was right beside the public library back then. And he would hear these stories. And he talked about how, these old men would talk about the massacre of 1898. And also they had the Gatling gun in that area back then, too, that they used in 1898. And then when he talks about it, actually show a picture of the Gatling gun. That was the picture that they took after they did the massacre, them on the wagon with the Gatling gun in the back. So when he talked about, playing with the Gatling gun as a kid, I wanted to show people that, it was a real Gatling gun that they used, and that's why I kind of put it up there on the screen for people to see. That, we just not making this up. They actually used a certain type of military, machine gun from back in the day to do the massacre and kill all these black people in the city.
And I think it's just amazing to think that photo was available and in the library. They were proud
I got
of that.
It's available for the use. They have it. Yeah, this is available in the library. They have a small collection in the public library today that just focuses on 1898. That picture is in there. Another picture of the white mob standing in front of Alex Manly's newspaper building that's burned down. They have a picture of that. They have a few pictures of those scenes, the aftermath scenes of the 1898 massacre.
Right. So this was definitely something that was planned, but it sounds like the community was proud of what happened.
Yeah. Back then, you had a lot of white folks who were very proud of what happened because, see, you got to understand that, and we talk about it in the film about propaganda and how they and pretty much conditioned people, for the carnage to come. Because you have to condition people, of why you're about to do what you're about to do. So they won't feel, sorry about it or try to stop you to do it either, doing it as well. And so when the massacre happened, you had a lot of white pastors that was pretty much saying that this is God's will, that this happened, that it needed to happen to restore balance and order in the city of Wilmington, that white supremacy is the rule and law of the day. And it needs to be back to what it is, So, and you had and these are like written accounts of people saying this in newspapers and everything back then. So the whole city changed dramatically after 1898. The African American community hasn't been the same since. Like I said, it was real progressive back then. It was the largest population of people back then in the city, but now it's like 80% white, 19-20% black now, and and that's what it is. African Americans hardly own and control anything in the city anymore, so you can really see the effects that still linger throughout the city. Even over 100 years later, you still see the effects of it.
And what's the general reaction of the community once Wilmington on Fire was premiered in that community?
It was a great experience because I actually premiered it for the first time ever this past November, and they have a big film festival in Wilmington. It's called the Cucalores Film Festival. It's a real big festival. It's one of the biggest and best film festivals in the whole state of North Carolina. So I premiered it there, and it was during the same week of the actual anniversary of the massacre. And I didn't know what to expect. I'm like, okay, it's maybe, a couple hundred people might show up. But I actually sold out the screening like about 3 or 4 days before my actual screening date. And we were in the biggest venue they had, which held about 550 people. And it sold out 4 days before my actual screening. So on the day of the event, they squeezed in about, 50 extra more people. So it's 600 people on the inside and you had about 400 people on the outside in a long line just hoping to get in. Somebody didn't show up. And I was like, wow. I was blown away. We actually broke the film festival's record for most attended screening ever this past November. So.
Yes, so while you had that large number of people following this film, was there a whole discussion? Because in the beginning, I think I heard you say something about reparations.
Yes.
Were some of the descendants there to participate in some type of dialogue regarding what happened?
Yes, we had in every screening, whether it was Cucaloris or any other screenings that we have, we always have a discussion afterwards, panel discussion with me and a few other people. Some of the descendants really couldn't come because they don't live in Wilmington, and they're kind of old as well, so they can't really travel. But, myself, I'm an advocate for reparations, and Larry Rennie Thomas, that's what his organization is doing as well. So we had me and Larry, Kent, and a few other people as well on, doing discussions and talking about reparations and, ways we need to push for this and just having an open dialogue, not only us talking, but we have the community to talk as well. And a lot of people, which really surprised me, I've noticed that a lot of white folks actually agree. After seeing the film, they actually agree that some type of reparations needs to happen. And that really shocked me. That I'm seeing, a lot of people, including white folks, even agreeing. But after they watch the film, we put the evidence right in front of you. You can't refute it. You can't refute it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's right there. It's clear cut. It happened. This is what happened. You see the direct results and the effects of it. There it is.
So, when you're saying that, because you said there was this commission, there were books that people had written, but now you're saying, okay, this film is out there.
Yes.
Is that bringing to light something that maybe only a few people were exposed to, but now you've exposed more in the community? Or do you still have this kind of hush, let's not talk about it situation going on?
It's making the dialogue more open because I'm going to tell you this story. We did a film screening up in Goldsboro. I showed the film in Goldsboro, North Carolina twice earlier this year. And Goldsboro is about an hour and a half from Wilmington. I had this older African-American gentleman. He stood up at the Q&A, and he talked about, he was from Wilmington actually. He's an old guy. I think he's about in his 90s. And he talked about growing up in Wilmington as a kid, as a boy. And he talked about how his parents never told him, they told him to never talk about what happened in 1898. And he remembered hearing, his parents talk about it, but he could never talk about it. They never really wanted him to talk about it outside of the house. And he said that was like the first time, he said this was the first time he actually, he felt the courage, after watching the film, to talk about it in public. You know what I'm saying? So those are the things that we're doing. That's what the film is doing, showing that, you don't have to be afraid to talk about this anymore. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do the film, to show that you don't, us as African-American people, we don't have to hide, this part of what happened to us. We need to be vocal about it, and we need to demand, something needs to be done about it as well.
So you have this open dialogue because what you're saying is these people live with secrets.
Yeah.
And until they had an opportunity to get these secrets out and even just share this, I mean, how can you have healing when you have this kind of undercurrent that's a part of your life and that something actually happened, but you can't talk about it? So it sounds like it was a good thing to at least have that dialogue with the community. Well, is this something
also it kind of, a lot of stuff that we talk about in the film, a lot of people are still seeing remnants of what's going on today still, of what happened in 1898. And I think that's what's really getting people to really engage in the dialogue after the film screening, because they still see the stuff, whether it's propaganda or just the government and stuff like that, whether it's in their own state or their own city. They kind of see a lot of that still going on within their communities today. And I think that's what's really, really getting them, is that showing that how a lot of this stuff that you saw happen back then that stuff is still happening today. And I think that's what's really getting a lot of people to really,
I guess so,
have them
yes.
wake up to a lot of stuff that's going on today.
Right. Now, when you laid out this story, because I know you had to lay it out in such a way that people really would kind of understand it and go to the next level wherever you wanted them to go. Tell us how you laid this story out for people.
Well, it's a it's a hard process for just the average person, but I don't know. You have to really have a creative mind. And what I did was I just did like a book report. I just took it back to like I was in middle school or high school. And when you learn, when you first learn how to do a book report, you start with an outline. So I just did that. I just created an outline of like headline titles on it and wrote it. I just took a notebook and just created an outline of introduction. Each point I wanted to kind of focus on a point and broke that down. Each point was like a chapter title, and I would write out a certain title, make up a title of whatever I wanted to focus on that chapter for 5 to 10 minutes. No more than 10 minutes. So that's how I pretty much got an outline. But when you're doing a film, when you're interviewing and filming people, a lot of times that outline is going to change a little bit, because when you talk to them, they might tell you something that you never even thought about or something that you never heard about. So now, it kind of throws off your outline somewhat, but that can be a good thing as well. So I pretty much just used a solid, detailed outline to really map out the whole thing and really focused on the main key points that I wanted to really push across. But it was a lot of editing with the editor. We went through, I'd say, about 50 different versions of the film, cutting out certain points. I didn't want the thing to be 8 hours long. It could have easily been 8 hours, but I know no one's going to sit down for 8 hours to watch a film. So I wanted it to be under 90 minutes, which I got it down to 89 minutes, which was good. So just doing a full-fledged outline is really how I was able to put this thing together. I developed a beginning, I developed a middle, like an arc, and I developed an ending, and then just tried to fill in the blanks between each of those to kind of just make everything flow. And it just took hours and hours of also transcribing and looking over all the interview stuff and breaking all their interview footage down word by word to see if it would fit into those, outline segments. Some of the stuff didn't fit at all, and I just couldn't use it, but more than enough of it did to fit in the outline, which helped me, kind of build the story throughout. So,
right,
it's a difficult process, for just the average person, but if you got like a creative mind, you kind of know what I'm talking about. So
you have to have that creative mind,
yeah.
which takes me to the next place. If you had to do this all over again, would you do it?
Oh, that's a great question. Sometimes I think no, but when I look back at it, yeah, I would do it. I would do it, no question. Because like I said, it's been a great ride so far. I've met a lot of great people by doing it. I think just the relationships I've built alone has been worth it. Like I said, I've met some great people just touring the film, met some great scholars and historians and researchers. Like I said, even behind the scenes, like my motion graphics people that I work with, my cinematographer. I can say that I actually gave a lot of people their first shot doing the film project. They're doing a major film project, and they've used this experience, and they've gotten great jobs and great careers out of it. So, I think, I would do it all over again because of those things that have came out of it. Not really having the film made, per se, that's still an accomplishment, but just developing a lot of good relationships and meeting a lot of great people along the way. I think that's what's really, that's been the best part about it.
Right, and because you have premiered it in Wilmington, what has happened to the people in Wilmington as a result of seeing this film?
Well, I think it's been, I think it just hasn't been the film. I think it's been a combination of things. I think the film has done a lot, but I also think that what they're seeing in the media and stuff that's being captured on cell phone, foot video as well, it's really opened up a lot of people and having a lot of people to start talking about reinvesting in the community in Wilmington. I'm seeing a lot of people talking about, starting black-owned businesses and supporting them, as a group now as well, which, when I first started doing the film, I hardly ever heard, African Americans in the city of Wilmington talk about that. So I'm seeing, a lot of that happening, so far. I think it's because of the film. If it is, that's great. If not, it's still great as long as, African Americans are trying to do what they need to do. So I think the film has done a lot, not only for the African American community, but I think it's done a lot for the white community as well. Because you have a lot of white folks who aren't really originally from Wilmington. You have a lot of people that come from other places to move to Wilmington.
Yes.
Wilmington is a beautiful place. It's a nice riverfront. There's about 3 or 4 beaches in Wilmington. So a lot of people come there, for tourism or they'll move there for a new job or something like that, relocate. So a lot of people that come to the screenings in Wilmington, a lot of times they're not even from the city. Either they just recently moved there or they've lived there for a few years. But they even recognize it when they come to the city that something is kind of, weird in regards to race relations. And then when they hear about my film, they say, okay, I see why now. Let me go see this film to really see why this city is the way it is. So I get that a lot, and people hit me up a lot, black and white, saying, how much they love the film, how much it is, opened their eyes and everything. So
how can the listeners see your film?
Well, the film is going to be released on DVD and on digital download on November 10th, and the reason why it's going to be November 10th because that's the actual day of the massacre. But you can log on to WilmingtonOnFire.com, WilmingtonOnFire.com, and keep up to date with the release and everything. But the DVD and digital download will be released and available for purchase on November 10th. And if you're on Facebook, you can go to Facebook.com/WilmingtonOnFire. Like the page, you can stay up to date with everything, and you can, sign up for my email blast as well on WilmingtonOnFire.com. Also, look out for the New Yorker magazine. They did an article about Wilmington on Fire, and it's going to be in the new issue of the New Yorker magazine. It's coming out next Monday.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. And I have a comment, and it's saying to you, congratulations for preserving the history. So you are to be commended. You are to be commended. So if others are considering doing something similar to what you have done in their community, what would you say to them?
I would say definitely do it. I would say start off in your own community first, because you'll be surprised what type of history is in your own backyard. I tell that to filmmakers a lot, because they want to go kind of big and go to a big city and try to find some history. They're like, nah, just start in your own backyard, because you'll be surprised what type of history is there. Because like I'm from a little town in Laurinburg, and we have a lot of history in the city of Laurinburg. It's like Wilmington isn't that big of a city, but you see the history they have with, the 1898 massacre. So I would say start in your own backyard. Also, believe in yourself and invest in yourself. You're going to have to put your own money into it to start off with, because no one's going to give you any money. You know what I'm saying? Just starting off this thing, because they feel like if you don't believe in yourself, why should they? You just have to, and that comes with a sacrifice. You might can't, go out to eat and do all these things that you probably are accustomed to doing. Instead of using that money to do that, save that money and use it towards your film project. Those are the sacrifices sometimes you have to make to do these type of projects. But if you believe in the project, you won't even miss it. And also, I think those are the two things: believing in yourself, starting your own backyard, and really putting your own money into it at the beginning. And once you get it rolling and putting your own money into it and getting it going and getting footage out there and really showing people that you're doing it, you'll be surprised a whole bunch of people want to help you. And that's what happened with me. I had an NBA guy, actually. That's how I actually got the film finished. And the NBA player reached out to me. And he saw that I didn't have the film finished yet, and I told him I needed a certain amount of money to get it done, and he gave me the money, no strings attached, and that's how I got the film made. So, you know, you'll be surprised if you just put the work in. You never know who's watching, and just don't think about, you know, I need to find this investor and stuff like that. Just do the best job you can. Study film. There's plenty of tutorials out there on YouTube for free of learning how to do a documentary, read as many books as possible. And these are the things that I've done over the years. I've purchased books on documentary filmmaking, looked at, you know, countless of documentaries just to study the editing styles, camera styles, and all of that. So if you just do those things, you can do it. You can do it. If I'm from Laurinburg, a small town called Laurinburg, North Carolina, and I was able to do it, anybody out there can do it because of the Internet as well. The Internet has really made it open to network and connect with anybody. Even after you make your film, you can sell your film to anybody across the world. So, you know, anyone out there can really do this. You just have to put in the time and the work into it.
Right. And we have a comment coming out of the chat. It says, thanks for sharing this history and your experience with us. Now, was there any reason you chose a documentary rather than other media like a book or a fictionalized movie?
A fictionalized movie would have cost a whole bunch of money. That's one. A fictionalized movie is still an option for me. I'm actually working on a treatment, you know, right now. So I may still do a fictionalized version of it, but I just didn't want to do it off then because I didn't have a lot of money to work with. Doing a documentary was, you know, it just worked better within the budget I had at the time.
I got it.
And doing a book, like I said earlier, a lot of people have written books about it. There's several books about it, but no one's actually did a documentary, an in-depth documentary. So I wanted to do something different. And that's why I kind of chose the documentary route, because I also already had experience doing a documentary as well. So the cost factor of it, and also I had experience already doing documentary films, kind of led me to just doing the documentary first, you know, because you had several people already who've written books about it, and I wanted to be outside of the box. I didn't want to do what everyone else was doing, so I decided to do a documentary on it.
Right. Well, thank you so much. You're so encouraging, but you're also very passionate about what you have done, and it's something to encourage others. You know, a book is one thing, a fictionalized movie, but also a documentary. Yeah. And one of the things
all
that
those different mediums are fine.
Doing,
you know, anyone out there, it's whatever you feel comfortable with doing. And if you want to do a book, you should do it. If you want to do an animated version of it, you should do it. You know, it's several different, you know, ways to preserve our history and tell the story.